Well, good afternoon, everybody. Here's our last, but not our least, presentation for the day. Boy, we've had some great presentations. I want to introduce Jeff Eichman, who's going to be our next presenter. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, his resume, and a little bit about him as a person. But before I do that, let me tell you that Jeff came very highly recommended to us. When we started talking about somebody to do the evaluation part of the program, sort of as a wrap-up, we heard many good reports about the years that Jeff has spent in doing district evaluations and helping schools and CTE programs do their evaluations. So I think you're going to be in for a real treat with Jeff Eichman today, talking about the program evaluation and the big picture, because that's the bottom line. It's all about accountability and making sure that things are happening the way that we want them to, and as administrators we have that responsibility. So Jeff Eichman, he's an education specialist, career and technical education, Region 6 in Huntsville, Texas. Jeff served 16 years as an agricultural science and FFA advisor. Jeff has had the opportunity during the past 6 years to work as a specialist at Region 6, a CTE specialist. He has participated in multiple on-site CTE program evaluations and safety facility audits through the state of Texas. Jeff currently serves as the Area 5 Career and Technology Association of Texas, or CTAT, president, and represents Area 5 on the CTAT Board of Directors. Jeff lives in Apple Springs with his bride, Missy, of 21 years, and their two children, Lauren and Luke. Welcome, Jeff Eichman, everybody.
Thanks, sir. Sure am excited to be here today and very honored to have the opportunity to talk about evaluations. And I know there's a lot of stuff that is in my presentation that we've already talked about, and so we're not going to probably go through each and every slide, but the whole premise of my presentation and what I thought about is, from time to time, when we get the opportunity to go into school districts to do evaluations, usually the phone call is, we want someone to come in to see what we're doing, to make sure we're doing things right. We need someone to come in to make sure that our facilities are up to date and adequate and meet industry standards and things like that. Or we're having some issues locally, and we need someone to come in to kind of help smooth those things out a little bit. Which is fine. I don't mind going in at any time and working and helping out whatever we can do. However, it is always good to have someone with outside pair of eyes, so to speak, to come in and see what you're doing. Because just like one of our earlier presenters was talking about, you kind of get focused in on what you do every day, and you maybe don't see things from a different perspective. And I had the opportunity one time early in my career service center to go in and do an evaluation with a school district. And of course they were receiving a visit from the agency for some PBMAS things. And we were sitting there talking, and I said, the superintendent said, I just kind of want to know why we're having such an issue with kids leaving and things like that. And I asked him, I said, well, hopefully you understand my point to this question is when is the last time you walked through the hallways of your school district and seen the big picture? And you were a teacher here, then you were a campus administrator, then you were an assistant superintendent, then you worked your way up to superintendent. So you've been here for 20 some odd years. When is the last time you looked at it, from a different view? So that, and he said, well, I don't know, what do you mean? I said, well, when I walk through your halls, I don't see anything, and I don't mean to be disrespectful when I say this, but I don't see anything if I'm a student that would excite me to come here every day because the walls are sterile. There's nothing that would excite me to look at or feel like an inviting environment. So the culture there was really different. And then when you went into the CTE program, the CTE classrooms, for example, they were just kind of doing the same old thing that we've always done, so to speak. And so, when you start talking about career and technical education and how it interacts with core curriculum and things like that, I truly believe, and it used to just irritate me as a teacher that they would take kids out of my classroom for tax remediation for 4 or 5 weeks, and I would go to our administration and say, you know, if Billy's not doing well in math, why are we taking him out of my classroom and putting him in another math class twice a day, or making him come to tutorials for 3 times a day to really make him learn math? How about we let me help with the math, and how about we teach math in a different way, and we work together with the math teachers, the algebra and geometry teachers in a team effort to try to get students to understand that there's, in my dad's old terminology, more than one way to skin a cat. I don't remember where that came from, but you know, that's just something he said. So, but anyway, there's more than one way to do things, right? Okay, so with that said, how do you know where you are unless you know where you got there and where you're headed? Who said that? I just did. See? I just did. There you go. My wife said, don't start that out that way. Everybody's going to think you're a dork. I said, I don't care. But stop and think about it. You know, how do you evaluate somewhere where you're at and where you're headed unless you know where you came from, right? Okay, so how did you get there? So everything that's in here, a lot of times I will get requests to not only do evaluations, but questions about what if this and what if that, how do we take care of it? And so here's what I'm going to tell you. Basically, this presentation, you can take it and start with number 1, and if you're preparing for a methods of evaluation, a new visit, and if you get to have that opportunity to come in and do and have an MOA at your district this year, basically this will prepare you for that. This will prepare you for reviewing just about anything that you want to in your program area. And so if you want to say, I want a checklist, or how do I know if I'm doing this right or that, that's pretty much what I've tried to think about. Now, of course, not everything is in here, but, you know, things that I've learned throughout the years. For example, when we start talking about staff and personnel and things like that, if you're fortunate enough to get an MOA visit, the first thing that they're going to want to know when they come in, and I had the opportunity back in November to sit with the team and go through one, is what is your hiring principles? Just like we talked about earlier with Erica and Travis talking about your retention and hiring process and things like that. They want to see an application. How did you announce that job? Then, once they start looking at your staff, how do you ensure that non-discrimination, not only with your program and students getting in your program, but how do you ensure that you do not have any discrimination problems with your staff? For example, why is, and I used to be an ag teacher, so I'm going to use ag for an example, why is the male ag teacher receiving a $3,500 stipend and his female counterpart has a $1,500 stipend? Why is that? And you say, well, that's because Mr. Eichman does this, 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 and this. The question will then be, where's that information documented? Where's the justification for paying the male more than the female? It should be in your job duties and responsibilities, and those should be updated annually. Okay? Plain and simple. There is your proof on why someone should be receiving a different salary or different pay scale than the other. And so, I know at the service center that was news to me when I came in. That's something that we have to do every year. We have to review our duties, our responsibilities. We go through an evaluation process mid-year, and then we go through an annual evaluation at the end of the year as well. And so, make sure to look at those things. Teachers that are teaching the classes they're assigned to teach. I know that's a novel concept. We talked about that earlier today, but unfortunately sometimes I do see some very creative things out there. As far as, well, I think they did teach a class somewhere related to this, so they're teaching that now. Make sure the certification area matches the assignment, and if your teachers need any additional certifications that we've already kind of talked about as far as Texas Gateway and the work-based learning endorsement and things like that, make sure they have that as well. Salary schedule, is it available? Do you know what it is? Are your teachers part of the professional organizations? Do you provide professional development? The sponsors for CTSOs, and then are your teachers effective? There's a really good tool that Bryan ISD presented at winter conference, and they're going to be presenting it again at summer conference over CTE effectiveness. And this is kind of how that came about. We sat down one day and he called me. Mr. Reynolds said, look, I got a problem. I have this teacher that has taken one student to a national competition, and my board thinks that is the best teacher ever. I know the reality that maybe that is not the best teacher ever. On the other hand, I have a teacher that is taking 40 students to state competition, does an excellent job, and they don't see that teacher as an effective teacher because they're not taking anybody to national competitions. You understand what I'm saying, going with this? So they sat down and said, we sat down one day during the summer, how do you determine if your teachers are effective? And so they increased tremendously, and they looked at a bunch of different areas. And I'm not going to steal this thunder, because if you get an opportunity this summer to go to the CTEC conference, you need to sit in that presentation, and he will give you their tool, and he will tell you exactly what they look at. But what it is it's a way to justify and help retain their teachers, because they're notifying their teachers up front what their responsibility is going to be, what they're going to be held accountable for, and how they need to perform in order to receive stipends and things like that. Okay? And so it's a really, really great tool that they came up with. And so, hopefully, and I know with the new evaluation system, things are definitely going to change. Those of y'all that are campus administrators that get to do T-tests, good luck to y'all. That's, because you're going to get some phone calls. Why did I not get this over here? Why am I? So you probably ought to just get a canned response answer right now and say the answer for that is. But good luck with that, and bless you. I'll pray for you guys. So anyway, but make sure you communicate with your teachers ahead of time. We already talked about non-discrimination statement, notifying that. Of course, you have to do it annually for Perkins. What is your grievance procedures? What are the grievance procedures? That'll be a question that is asked as well. Has there been any grievances at the campus level, district level? Who was the grievance? Was it a student? Was it a parent? Was it a staff member? What is that process? Who hears it? How does it all work? They're going to want to know all that, and you're going to have to be able to explain that. That may or may not be part of your responsibility, okay? But you're probably going to be involved in the process, especially if it was a grievance in the CTE department. And you can bet, rest assured you're going to be involved with that. And then as far as barriers to enrollment, as far as an admission process, and I know Mr. Shipp talked about this earlier, as far as they don't have applications. And that's something, when I come in and do an evaluation, the first thing we look at is your course selection guide, student handbook. I look at anything in there, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. Anything that says principal approval, counselor approval, teacher approval, or anything like that. I even look at bands, jazz, drama, one-act play, everything. Has nothing to do with CTE, but it's in the handbook, and I know that when the agency comes in and reviews that, that's going to be looked at. Why is there an approval process? Why are you making the decision, one person making the decision whether my son or daughter gets into your program? Shouldn't be the case, right? And so make sure you can review your documents back at home to make sure that you don't have anything like that. Can you have an admission process? Absolutely, you can have an admission process. And my recommendation would be is that it's based on data, it's based on attendance, you can base it on whatever you want it to be, but it's a rubric that's used that everybody understands what the process is. For example, if you're working with a partner institute of higher education and they say you only get 10 seats, that's all you get, that's a little different process then, right? Versus something that we're doing locally. And then look at your master schedule. I know some of you guys in larger districts probably not an issue, but in smaller districts, if you're having an issue with non-traditional on your PBMAS data, the last thing you want to do is schedule the only class that you offer in a sequence for non-traditional females, and you don't want to do that at the same time as girls athletics. Okay? You just don't want to do that. But we see it time and time again. And the same thing on that as far as males. The one course you offer in the day for for males is the same time as boys athletics. So, you can change the classes and prevent something like that. So look at that. Now, facilities. All I have to say about facilities is I have seen some very interesting things over the years. I have seen some amazing facilities, state-of-the-art, awesome, wonderful, great facilities, and I've seen other facilities that probably 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, they were really awesome too. However, things have changed over the years, and things have kind of been let go. For the life of me, I don't understand, and I don't know, but in some districts, I don't understand why there's no doors on boys' restrooms. Did any of y'all experience this? I mean, the girls has a door on it, but boys doesn't. I've been in the school shops. There's no doors on either restroom. And so if that's your changing facility for females to get ready to go into a class or lab, surely you ought to have a door on there. Surely you ought to have a door that locks. Surely it ought to be a door that the handle is not something that someone with accessibility issues would have a problem opening and closing. Okay? Little things like that. So anyway, be sure to look at your instructional resources and make sure that they meet specifications. Hazardous materials should be stored properly, and you should have some type of schedule if you have to have materials removed from the premises. Your personal protective equipment. You know, I don't know how many times when I taught, I was very proactive as far as personal protective equipment and safety glasses and things like that. And I was just very, I made sure that students were, I always feared to have a student hurt on my watch, so to speak. That's just something I never wanted to do. I never wanted to have to make a phone call. I didn't want to have to call an administrator, and I sure didn't want to ever have to call a parent and say, guess what happened today? I just wasn't going to do that. And so, I was not one of those type of teachers that sat in my office while the kids were in the shop or in the classroom with 2 or 3 students while there's 15 unattended. I was not the type of teacher that let my students go in the shop while I was absent at another function. If Mr. Eichman wasn't there, nobody went in the shop. Period. That's just the way it was. Because that substitute, I'm not going to put them in that position. And they are not qualified to have students out there. Well, my dad had tools like that. Well, that's great. They go work with your dad on the weekend, which out here, we're not going to do that. Okay? So facilities, lighting, ventilation, first aid, and things like that. What is your response to an accident? Lockdown procedures, unfortunately, we have to worry about that now, right? And then in the evacuation procedures, do you have the evacuation route posted so that, do I know how to get out of here in the event of emergency? How many of y'all, I don't know about y'all, but you stay at hotels a lot. Do you ever stop and think about if bang, bang, bang goes off, where's the elevator at? And how do I get out of here? Do you ever think about that?
Stairway, not the elevator.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So, I mean, but those things like that. So what would you do in the event if I don't know what y'all's code word was, but mine used to be the superintendent's on campus today. If they came over the intercom, that means we locked down. So I don't know what your code word is for that, but what would you do? Or bad weather or anything like that. As far as accessibility issues, something that I did learn on our MOA visit this year, that the agency is not enforcing yet, but very well will be in the future. And Lord knows the door of my hotel room would not pass this at all, because that sucker had a vacuum or something on. I had to get it. Did y'all like that?
Yes.
Okay.
It was more than 5 pounds.
More than 5 pounds of pressure, I can tell you that. So any interior door in your facility cannot have more than 5 pounds of PSI pressure in order to get out and through that doorway. And that's something I learned on the visit, and they will start being enforced very near future. So you say, how in the world are we supposed to know? Well, there is a gauge that you can get, that you hold, and you push against the door and open it, and basically it will tell you the PSI of force that it takes to get out of the door. So I don't know about y'all, but I've been in office buildings and things like that where there's an outside door right there and then another door, and that creates a vacuum sometimes, or when the wind's blowing and it's like trying to get out. Those are the kind of things you need to get with maintenance and start looking at right now. Doorknobs, openings, and all those kind of things, ramps, thresholds, of course, trip hazards, sidewalks, or not. I love to go to schools that, our new greenhouse is right out there in the middle of that field. And you have to traverse it on a 2x4 across the muddy field. I don't traverse 2x4s very well, so I would prefer a 36-inch sidewalk. Okay? And you say, well, we don't have any students that are mobility impaired. We don't have to worry about that. Au contraire, because second, third day of school, our star quarterback got his femur broke and is in a wheelchair in my ag shop now because in a scrimmage. And he wasn't mobility impaired before that game, but now he is. So how does he get in and out of my building? How does he get in and out of my restrooms? How does he get to the greenhouse? Well, he, I guess, puts 4-wheel drive and go up there and do the mud. So, you know, stop and think about those things. And then Mr. Shipping talked about this today, signage. Make sure that you have signage, have adequate number of parking spaces. Make sure there's no barriers in your parking spaces. Sidewalks don't have cracks in them or trip hazards or anything like that. I already talked about the females and male changing rooms. And then, do your facilities meet what your industry and business partners require? Is it a space requirement or whatever piece of equipment you're going to be using? Does it meet that? I went into a robotics program classroom last year, and it was in a traditional classroom with carpet. Not the best scenario for a robotics program that is trying to figure out a problem to throw a ball 10 foot in the air with an 8-foot ceiling, and then they're in there doing, you know, shaving and drilling, bless you, with metal and stuff on carpet. And so probably not the best scenario. So after we went into the evaluation, as I was walking around, just so happens there is the back of the cafeteria that's no longer used was just sitting there vacant. And so I asked the deputy superintendent, what is this space right here used for? And I said, well, we used to use it for such and such, but now on days when it's inclement weather, our drill team and stuff like that comes in here, but that's not very often. I said, so you're telling me that this big, huge space right here with this 16-foot ceiling is vacant? Yeah. So when I went back about 2 months ago to do their annual evaluation, guess where the robotics program's at now? In that facility. So sometimes those blinders, you know, you need to take them off. That's kind of what I was talking about, okay? Cleaning schedule. You know, like, why are you talking about that? Well, because I had to push a bucket more than once in my shop because nobody else would. But I also hear this from teachers about when we're there talking to them, see if you can get the cleaning staff to come in here and empty the trash cans in the culinary lab and stuff like that. And so just stop and think about that, you know. The less that you have to hear about problems like that, the better for you too, right? Also better for the program. So make sure there's a schedule there. As far as security of the facility and things like that, who locks it up at the end of the day, who's the first responder. I used to be the first responder on our call when I taught at Crockett. And every time we get a north wind, the door contact on my door would do that. And guess what? At 2 in the morning, I got a phone call from Resource Security that there is a Zone 5. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we've got to get that fixed. I don't like to woke up at 2 in the morning. Okay, so anyway, make sure that you know, all that's taken care of, and then the facility is appropriate for the program that's offered. I'm not going to get into class size and things like that. Lord knows I get enough phone calls, and it's usually about a month from now I'll start getting them from teachers. Hey, where's that document that says that there can't be no more than 15 people in my class in the lab? I'm like, well, that's a good question, because when you get it, we'll all know, because there is no such document. Okay, what you need to do is offer, you know, appropriate amount of students for a safe environment for your students, and that's your determination on what that is, not mine. Okay, I can make a recommendation, but that's up to you and your district to make that decision. But ensure that a good, safe environment where nobody's going to get hurt. And which is becoming more and more common and more popular as far as new facilities that are being built now, are they able to be adapted to be used by the program? Meaning that if for some reason or other we have a program that we're working with a business partner on, and after 2 or 3 years that program maybe fades out and we do something else, are we bound by the structure that we can't do anything else in there? Or is it flexible enough where we can maybe move walls and have a common place where we can now add another program in there? It's becoming more and more popular with that right there, with removable walls for classrooms instead of making traditional classrooms. Facilities that are more user-friendly, more open concept, and adaptable to different program areas. Now, of course, if you're in auto tech or something like that with lifts and things like that, that's a little bit different. But as far as traditional classrooms, I know more and more of the facilities that are being built, they don't have traditional classrooms. They have a scenario just like this right here. A bigger facility with movable walls that can be moved in and out for different functions. So we're not using that floor space necessarily for a traditional classroom. And so, anyway, something to think about. Course selection guide, I already kind of talked about this. Make sure your course selection guide doesn't have any problems in there, issues. Why are you offering the programs that you're offering? I know Greg talked about that earlier. And a good friend of mine always talks about is, are we a a student-friendly campus or are we a teacher-friendly campus? You know, at the end of the day, why are we here? We're here for students. And I know a lot of times, and I just had this phone call last week from an administrator calling me saying that, hey, well, we're going to offer this, 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 and this. And I said, that's great. What do your students want to do? Do you have any student data to back that decision up? Well, but we think it's a good idea, you know. And I said, well, that's great. But what do the students, at the end of the day, what do they want to do? And I know that sounds easy to say, and I know sometimes it's harder to accomplish. But really, at the end of the day, when I go in and do an evaluation and I see 6 kids engaged, 16 of them sleeping in the classroom, I can ask those 16 students, why are you out here? And what do they tell me?
They put me here.
They put me out here. You didn't choose this career pathway? No. I needed somewhere to go. I know Dr. Chapman was very passionate this morning. Very passionate. Known him a long time. Sometimes just putting somebody in a class is not always the best policy. Okay? That's just my opinion. Because I was that teacher that had those kids put out there that did not want to be out there. And then you expect me to do my song and dance to entertain them when they don't want to be out there. I don't want to be around welding. It's dirty. It's hot. It's loud. It's a bunch of noise, sparks flying. That ain't for me. Put me somewhere else. Well, fourth period, Mr. Eichman had to play some stuff where we put you. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sorry. Some of y'all look offended. Okay. Coherent sequence, make sure we have that. Lead to post-secondary opportunities, articulation agreements, dual credit, and things like that. We already talked about certifications. I thought the presentation at lunch was awesome about, you know, if you're not offering those certifications, that means something. Why are you doing it? Just to be doing it. I thought that was a great statement. I love that. I wrote that down. And then, of course, you know, as far as House Bill 5 and then also our new legislation, House Bill 18, and things like that, where we're talking about college and career readiness at the 7th and 8th grade level. How many of y'all have actually studied House Bill 5 and know it? Excellent. Let me ask you this little question. How many of y'all that just raised your hand offer a high school graduation credit class at, say, the 8th grade level? Have your students, those of y'all that said yes, have your students been notified of financial aid? Have they been notified of entrance exams and entrance applications and things to get into college and everything prior to taking that class at the 8th grade level for high school credit? You're saying yes. Congratulations, because that's what House Bill 5 says.
Yeah, parents as well.
That's exactly right. But students, more importantly, have to be told about financial aid opportunities, attendance, admission process and everything getting into college prior to taking any class for high school credit. It says it in House Bill 5. Okay? So they have to be notified of that and informed of that. So if you offer high school graduation credit classes at 8th grade, you better be doing it in 7th grade. Okay? So there's my little freebie for the day. There you go. Anyway, and I didn't learn that until I was actually going through a presentation back in January. I'm like, well, I didn't even know that. I thought I knew everything about House Bill 5. So anyway, all right, budget. We're not going to talk about money necessarily. We're not going to talk about generating funds and things like that. But here's what we are going to talk about. What are your procedures as far as those of y'all, we've talked about Perkins. Yesterday we spent talking about Perkins. And so those of y'all that are responsible for that, what is your process and procedures for allocation of those funds? We were visiting yesterday during break with some of the members of our room in here. And, you know, the one thing before you get that NOGA, actually before you even send in that application, what you should do is to make sure you have a needs assessment on how that money is going to be spent. And I didn't really hear that a whole lot yesterday in all the presentations about Perkins and everything. But our buddy Edgar sure said so. Okay, our buddy Edgar says that you better make sure to have a needs assessment before you get your NOGA and before that money actually comes back into the district. And you sure better have a needs assessment conducted and done and documented before you spend a penny of those federal funds. And if you want something to do tonight and you don't have anything else to do and you're kind of downtime, just pick up our buddy Edgar's little book and start reading it and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so process is, it's a needs assessment, not a wish list. Who makes the decisions, who's doing the amendments on the grant application, who's in charge of the ADC form, who's in charge of all that, the PER, everything we've talked about. Here's my question to all that. Are those responsibilities written in your job duties if you're that person? If you're the person that's responsible for the application, the ADC form, the PER, any amendments, closing out, everything. I am that person in charge of those federal funds at my district. Does your job duties reflect that? Is it listed in that much detail? It should have. Edgar says it better. Okay? It says if you're responsible for spending any federal funds, then those duties have to be clearly laid out and explained so that if I come in and do an audit, I know who I go talk to and who's in charge of that. Plain and simple. So that's why I talked about job duties and responsibilities starting this presentation. Pretty important. So all that needs to be listed. Okay. What process do you use? For my SSAs, when they purchase things sometimes, and they send me a credit card, a picture of their credit card statement that they did on a credit card, and they would like reimbursement. I'm like, that doesn't prove anything. You know, I get a credit card statement. That doesn't mean that I paid for it. You know what I'm saying? So what is proof of that? Proof is a check to Visa or MasterCard or Home Depot or whomever showing that you paid for it. That's documentation. So you ought to start thinking about the same thing. Documentation. How are you able to track that penny through the whole system? From the requisition process to how it all goes back. Travel reimbursement is after the fact, ladies and gentlemen. We do not use federal funds and give teachers $500 and say, go have a good conference and bring us the rest back. Or per diem is $36 a day times 5 days. Here's your per diem, go have fun. We don't do that with federal dollars anymore. I wouldn't. Edgar will get very mad at you. Okay? So it's after the fact. Reimbursement, travel reimbursement, after the fact. That means receipts, documentation, all those things. Just because you get an $8 allotment for breakfast doesn't mean you turn in $8 unless you have what? A receipt. Okay? Needs to have receipts for everything, copies of everything, documentation of everything. How's the money allocated? We already talked about, Mr. Ship talked about summary finance. And one thing I did put in here that maybe he did talk about, and here's a question and a call that I get quite often too from a business manager or CFO or somebody will say, hey man, we got like 60 grand in our 199 budget, where did it come from? And I'm like, okay, well let's look at last year. No, Jeff, you don't understand, I'm talking about this year. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly right. Let's look at last year's data. Okay, did you have an influx in FTEs? Did you have an influx? Yeah, we did. We went from 7 period to 8 period day. Or we added this program, we added that program. I'm like, well, there you go. There's your money right there. And the reason is because once your summer data gets submitted, it takes the time for all that information to get input, and you're not going to know that until about October of this school year, next school year, October, November, when you get that near final summary and finance report for this school year. So that's when you'll see that influx of funds. And 58% of that should be spent back on the program that generated, correct? Okay? And if you want to say, well, we want to know exactly how last year really was, then you can go on there and get the final report, which is about April. Okay, April or May or somewhere in there. That is the final number for last school year. And Mr. Ship was correct about going back and looking at 3 years prior, too. And I had an interesting call about a month ago from a young lady. And just FYI, I don't mind who you are or where you're from. I'll be glad to help anybody. And she was actually in a training, I guess, this winter or something, and said, well, you said we could call. And I said, yeah, that's fine. But I don't want to tell you who I am or where I'm from. And I wanted to say, well, that's okay. The caller ID on the phone tells me your number and the school district you're calling from. But, okay, I don't know who you are. Okay, so anyway. But she was brand new as a director, just got the job, started looking at money, and lo and behold, could add 2 plus 2, and it was coming up 3, not 4. And, what can I do about that? And I said, well, here's what you do about that. Number one, you don't go kicking open the door and saying, I want my money. What you do say is, that guy at Region 6, that big dude named Jeff, I don't know who he is, but he told me this. And I said, feel free to put it all over on me. I'll be glad to discuss it with your CFO or whomever on how money is generated and how it needs to be used. Feel free to let me fight your battles for you. I don't mind, because I don't work there, you do. And you want to keep employment there, so don't go in there and cause a problem. Let me take care of that for you. I don't mind, because I can talk about how the money's generated and where it goes and what has to be spent. Okay? And so she called me back like 2 weeks ago and said, well, I can tell you where I'm from now. And I was like, are you from? And she goes, how'd you know? I'm like, well, yes. But anyway, so I don't mind. Feel free to call me. I don't mind at all. And then, of course, we're talking about federal funds. Make sure there are 9 uses. And something, maybe I didn't put it on here, but something I'm going to tell you that a good friend of mine, we went out and did an evaluation at their district back in May, and on their purchase requisition form that teachers fill out for to him to buy something, he has the 9 required uses of Perkins down there. And some of y'all shaking your head, so that's a good practice. I like that. And if y'all don't do that, and so the teacher basically has to put down what area it's going to be used, how it relates to Perkins, and what of those 9 uses that it satisfies for. And it's on the purchase requisition form that the teacher signs for the piece of equipment or the supplies or what they're getting. I thought that was really good. And some of y'all are saying yes, so obviously you already do that. Do y'all? Some of y'all already do that? That's great. That is a great practice. That is excellent documentation.
On for state allotment, put they're required to put their campus needs assessment, the objective and goal of what it will meet.
Absolutely. That's awesome. That's awesome. The more you can document the use of funds, the better. And I think that's excellent. That's excellent. What school were you with, Peter?
Lubbock Cooper.
Lubbock. Would you mind making that available to share where we could see it? Would you mind? If not, I'm not talking about right now, but
If it's something, we'll put it on the library.
I was gonna say,
Sharing it.
Okay.
if you don't mind, I don't mean to call you out like that.
No, you're fine.
Anything, I don't know about education, I don't know about y'all, but big borrow and, don't reinvent the wheel. That's what I always talk. So, anyway, something that coding we talked about a little bit yesterday, and I know Mr. Shipp talked about coding this morning and things like that. And we recommend a committee. Hopefully, it's not just you in a room. Hopefully, it's not you reviewing things. I talked to a counselor about last year when we were at their district. She said, well, I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm going to keep doing it until they carry me out of here. And I said, well, unfortunately, miss, I hope that doesn't happen very soon, but what is going to happen when you do decide to leave? Who's going to come in here and replace you that knows the process? What is the system that you use? What is the process that you use? What is your procedures? It would be best if you had a committee of at least a couple of people, 2 or 3, that goes over that process so everybody understands what's going on. Everybody knows that we don't change codes on test documents that we start off in the fall with. Everybody knows all that. We don't do those things. Okay? Because then that way we don't have to answer for them later. All right? And so once again, job responsibilities, and we're talking about the title of the person, so they know, so that when I take the job as PEIMS coordinator, I know one of my responsibilities is to do CTE coding. Okay? And then when you change management systems, have any of y'all ever experienced this? Is it seamless, like they promised you? Yeah. Those of y'all that use Texas, for example, I can tell you this: you code a student a 2. This school year ends, next school year starts over. Guess what Billy, who's coded a 2, is now coded as? It defaults to a 0, every student. Surprise! So you leave, the next person comes in, they don't know anything about that. They assume everybody's still coded a 2. You turn in your data, you have no 2s. Guess what you don't get the next year? An application to receive Carl Perkins funding, because you don't have any coherent sequence things. Does it happen? Absolutely it happens. It does happen. So when you change management systems, hopefully you're involved in that conversation and you're in that room as well. Make sure you understand what the submission dates are and things like that. As far as materials and resources, we've kind of already talked a lot about this, but if you're buying things with Perkins, and I don't know how many of y'all make your teachers turn in an end of the year inventory, but that's something that we always did. I know a lot of times when I bring that up, and I'm presenting down at the Ag Teachers Conference in a month, and they are not going to like to hear those kind of things because I used to be an Ag teacher and I know how they are. And I'm not bashing Ag teachers, but you expect me to count every screwdriver and hammer and everything? Yeah, I do. I really do. I expect you to tell me if there's a half gallon of paint in that $45 of paint. Why? Because insurance companies will pay you half of that value if you document that there's a half gallon in there. You say, well, why do I care? Well, I don't know. You could be like West ISD several years ago that experienced a horrific accident. You could be like Van ISD that experienced a horrific tornado a year ago. And the list can go on and on and on. I mean, just stop and think for a minute. If, God forbid, something bad happened, could you put a dollar figure on what you have in your facilities? Could you say we had X amount of dollars and this is what we had in there? But if you have a document that shows all that, definitely that's not a problem then. That's an easy conversation to have after the fact. Okay? So anyway, it's just a good practice. It's a good practice to say that that piece of equipment was bought in 1963. That's good documentation that we might need to update. Okay? It's good documentation that is bought with state funds or federal funds. It's good documentation. I don't know if you have an identification process and tagging of pieces of equipment, but you should. And then as far as repairing it, deleting it, and all those kind of things, hopefully you got procedures for all that. As far as curriculum, the same kind of thing. Hopefully you're actually reviewing curriculum. I know that we're going to have a curriculum update and things as far as the new teams coming out next year. But do we have any technology or equipment needs that need to be updated to go along with that? And things like that. Professional development needs, ongoing training, effective, bless you, curriculum. How many of y'all include in your student surveys about curriculum and instructional resources and things like that in your program areas? And not just your teacher, but you know, everything that we used in here, was it effective? Did you think it helped you? In your opinion, could we do a better job? What can we add to it? What are some things like that on your feedback from your students and teachers? And then of course, you know, are they helping with instructional and certification requirements and things like that? For example, NCCR. I know Ms. Ruthie's a master trainer and IR1 too for NCCR. And so there's things that that teacher will need as far as buying and having extra curriculum in order to provide that training for those students to receive that certification. And so those are the kind of things you need to know ahead of time before we add those things. Okay? We already just talked about advisory committee, so Lord knows I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about that. I'm not going to really talk about who, what, when, and where, because I think George did an awesome job with that, and I'm not going to go over anything more than that. But as far as my list goes, I'm thinking a little bit more smaller school, okay, smaller community, okay, as far as 7 to 10 people and things like that. And some of you, some of the school districts that we deal with, it might be hard to get 7 people in the community there. It really is, because they are a small community. You know, they have under 50 kids in high school. So we are like, well, we got that in the class. You know, well, that's just the different ends of the spectrum. So as far as having a lot of the different people on that committee and things like that, the one thing as far as responsibility and submitting a committee member, chair and things like that, I thought that was great. One thing that he didn't say that I will say is that you need to have documentation, and you need to keep that documentation in a folder, so that in the event that you get to win the lottery and have a visit, you want to show documentation of your visit, of your meetings. You want to show the agenda, copy of the minutes, sign-in sheets, and things like that, that will show verification that you did have that meeting. Okay? And I put on there, you know, small, 30, 45 minutes. You know, they're busy people. I think he made that point pretty clear too. I put on there no meals, snacks are fine, things like that. The reason is you're busy too, and I don't want you to have to, well, now I got to go get a meal and all this kind of thing. Like he said, get with your committee and ask them when's the best time to meet and what they prefer. I think that was great information. I thought he had a great program. So make sure you keep that documentation. Your CTSOs, I get a lot of calls about officer elections and the process of that. And I always say, what is your policies and procedures, what does your constitution and bylaws of that organization say? And when there's a pause on the other end of the phone, they say, well, we don't have that. I said, well, that's probably step number one. You probably need to make sure you have a constitution and bylaws. I'm very familiar with FFA, and I know that FFA has constitution and bylaws. And if you are new and you don't know, you can call the state office, and there's a constitution and bylaws for every chapter in the state submitted to the state office, because we had to do that several years ago. Might be a good idea to review them, and maybe you need to be updated. Fundraising, money has never got anybody in trouble, right? There's never been an issue with fundraising ever. So hopefully our activity account procedures are written down. When I went to the school district, first started teaching that little 1A school district, basically the secretary, superintendent, PEIMS clerk, ran the school, superintendent, secretary, she did everything. she told me what our procedures were. She told me that the dollar bills had to face a certain way and things like that. And yes, ma'am, that's exactly right. The next school that I went to, just give me your bag, I'll count it, and I'll let you know how much was in there. I'm like, oh, no. Miss Bobby taught me a whole different process, and we're going to do Miss Bobby's process. I'm going to lay it out. Dollar bills are going to be facing this way. I'm going to tell you how many ones, how many fives, how many tens. I'm going to have all that figured out. You're going to count it right in front of you. You're going to sign that piece of paper and verify that I'm giving you that amount of money. And then we're going to put that in my ledger. Thank goodness we did, because the second year I was at that school district, we had somebody in that position that was creative in their financing, and not all the money that we had submitted throughout the year got deposited in our activity account. I guess it got in somebody else's account, but it didn't get in ours. But I had documentation of what should have been in there, and that was an easy discussion to have on what we should have had in our activity account, because we had documentation. So, I say that to say this: whatever your procedures are, as far as how many fundraising events they can have per year, and how all that is, overnight procedures and things like that. I get a phone call the other day, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, was the FFA trap and skeet shoot. Got a phone call, can they put shotguns in the school vehicle to go to this activity? And I said, well, hopefully they're not loaded. But what was my response to you? What do you think I told them? What do your procedures say about that? Okay? What do your procedures say about that? So think about things like that. Things that you would never even, like those kind of phone calls. Responsibilities of advisor, career prep and practical training. Hopefully that you have your teachers go to a training. I know we have one online now that is provided by the TEA, and some of us still actually do those trainings, and I actually have one coming up in August. But the main thing is to make sure to have your documentation so that you are verified to the state that those students are at work for 2 or 3 hours a day, because that's what you're being paid for. So documentation would be the training plans, the evaluation forms, wage and earning verification, and things like that. Those are all documents that should be in a folder locked up somewhere that are not easily accessible to everyone else. I shake my head sometimes when I walk in their classroom and there's their folders for their kids, and there's copies of their pay stubs on there with their social security number right there that anybody could get. And I'm like, y'all don't have anything that would lock that you can hide that behind? So, but anyway, those are all documentation. Last but not least, he said it right: evaluate your students and get your past students and ask them, did we do a good job? And things like that. Your safety exams, assessment data, attendance, career interest surveys, your 4-year plans and PGPs. Just create something, a checklist or anything, and you can kind of start going through this presentation and just start going down, how effective are we here, and this and that. Just create a simple Excel document or whatever you want to create to have something. And so, Lord knows there's a whole lot more, not one size fits all. There's a lot out there, but my advice would be is that if you are going to receive a methods of administration visit in the near future, there is a resource document that's provided that they pretty much tell you what they want to see. That is a good thing to have, and what we used to have the compliance review for years ago for the PAR visits, that was a good tool that we also used for an evaluation, because if they come, that's what they want to see, so why not be proactive and make sure you got all that taken care of ahead of time. Okay? Questions? I went through that really, really quick. I apologize, but trying to get wrapped up. Anybody got any questions? Okay, I did such a great job, nobody has any questions. Or you're ready to go home, right? I want to say thank you for making me the last person of the day. Thank you very much.
Jeff, where would we find the method of administration document, TEA?
Yes, there's a website specifically for that, and that resource document. Absolutely.